Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Kelly here with Esri, and I'd like to thank you for joining us on our webinar today, Aviation Charting in ArcGIS Pro. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few items. This webinar is being recorded and you will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording location once it's made available. You are encouraged to post your questions during the presentation. You can type them in at any time into the question or chat box in your GoToWebinar control panel, and our presenters will collect these and address them in a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So today we're going to be discussing aviation charting in ArcGIS Pro, and with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to our first presenter today, Jonathan Weaver.
Great, thank you, Kelly, and welcome everyone. This is the first offering of this webinar. We'll actually be conducting the same webinar in about 13 hours time, really for the Asia Pacific region. I'm excited to be a part of this presentation as there's been a lot of work that's gone into our aviation product. The team has built out a lot of capabilities inside of ArcGIS Pro, and we're going to be sharing some of that with you today. My name is Jonathan Weaver. I manage our global aviation business development. I'm joined by Amit Jain, the aviation product manager, and then Nick Jones, the aviation product engineer. So when talking about ArcGIS aviation charting, I often think of data-driven charting or cartography. The charts are not just derived from a data set, but they're done so in a manner that allows the data to be used in multiple charts or products. Not only that, it has to remain connected to the data source. So it's actively listening for changes. And that's one of the key advantages of having a data-driven charting system, having it work for you. So when we look at data-driven charting, oftentimes we think about ICAO's transition from AIS to AIM. And when you get to that phase 3, you've got phase 1, which is consolidation, phase 2, going digital, phase 3, that information management. That's when you're actually getting closer and closer to a fully data-driven system, whether it's data-driven charting or data-driven, products and services that you're generating. So the ability to centralize all of our data holdings and data management, pulling in those various sources of data, so whether it's AIXM, terrain, obstacles, even real-time observations, and then from that, generation of your chart products, your data products, your web applications, and web services. Let's make no mistake, aeronautical charts are complex. The data model is complex. It's not optimized for cartography. The symbols and text are not standard. The cartographic portrayal has very complex business rules that we have to leverage and use, store, repeat that process. And quite honestly, we've been doing this for a long time, since the initial release of the aeronautical charting product back in, I think it was 2006. All that was done in ArcMap, connected to an enterprise database. So when we talk about ArcMap along with enterprise and server capabilities, all of this is known as ArcGIS. And as a platform, ArcGIS has evolved. So we now have a complete system or a complete platform for managing all of your aviation GIS data. This platform serves not only civil aviation authorities and air navigation service provider, but it serves airports, commercial aviation, airlines, and more. It truly is an interconnected system that matches the nature of aviation as a whole with its interconnected stakeholders. So our ability to collect and integrate different information streams and sources from AIXM to structured and unstructured data, imagery, field observations, real-time observations, think of real-time aircraft positions, taking that information and then adding some kind of contextual piece of knowledge on top of that to create some kind of analytical product. So whether it's obstacle assessment or noise abatement, aviation weather, being able to understand, look for patterns within our data. And then once we understand what those patterns are, we want to be able to communicate that and so produce specific information products such as charts, dashboards, web applications, and so forth. So all of this is really allowing organizations to access that content and share it across the different mission areas of the organization. So whether it's the planning department, the air navigation services department, environment, dispatch, weather, even operations and facilities, if you're looking more at the airport side of things, being able to access this content from any device, anywhere, anytime is really essential. That allows these organizations to collaborate at scale. So even with the success that we've had with ArcMap and our customers across all of the industries, we've been focusing a lot of our efforts on leveraging some of the advances in technology to evolve and create really what's considered the most powerful GIS desktop application now, which is ArcGIS Pro. It's a 64-bit multi-threaded application. What does that mean? It means that you're gonna recognize some serious performance gains. It's combining the 2D and 3D experience into one application. So if you're familiar with working inside of ArcMap, as well as ArcScene or ArcGlobe, the 3D tools, we're bringing all of that together inside of a single application. The ability to have multiple maps and scenes and layouts within the same application, that is going to be really relevant as we look towards a more robust charting application and charting system. And then, of course, there's a lot of rich analysis capabilities because we're leveraging the geoprocessing framework. We've got hundreds and hundreds of geoprocessing tools and analytical tools at our disposal, including those in the realm of artificial intelligence and machine learning. There's some deep learning tools within ArcGIS Pro that we can leverage for automated data extraction, as an example. And then finally, all of this is integrated with the ArcGIS platform. This means that we can author content easily inside of ArcGIS Pro and share that content out as web maps and web scenes using web services. Now, built on top of ArcGIS Pro, we have a couple of specialized products for aviation. One is ArcGIS Aviation Charting, which focuses on the cartographic aspect. It's pulling in the data management side of things with AIXM, being able to manage that data, to create data, but also really to transform that data into some rich cartographic products. So whether it's en route charts or visual charts, and then there's a third component, which is the obstacle assessment and that component as well. So all of that is a part of the aviation charting product. Then we also have ArcGIS Aviation Airports, and you'll see that there's some commonality between charting and airports. So there is a data management component within the airports. That is focused on AMDB, airport infrastructure mapping. And then there's also obstacles. So there's some shared components with the obstacles. And then another component, which is dealing more with the signage and marking. So being able to create your signage and marking plans and then submit that to the appropriate authority. So we're going to be focusing, of course, on all of the charting components in this particular webinar. So what do you really get when you get ArcGIS Aviation Charting? Well, you get a performant, easy to use application. It's easily configurable, a solution that's interoperable and cross-platform. So by cross-platform, I mean we're able to execute some of the chart production processes, not only from the desktop environment, but also from a server environment or a web environment. All of this is possible through the specific set of tools that we have in charting. Things like having a rich geoprocessing framework, which I mentioned earlier. Context-sensitive menus, so knowing what type of data that you're working on and presenting the user with the applicable tools and actions associated with that data. We have tools to manage all of the charts in an organized structure. How do we mine that data from a complex data model like AIXM so we can portray the features correctly using the IKO styles and symbols? Leveraging our annotation engine so we can have precise control over the placement options with the text and annotation. And then the automation aspect. And this is going to be one of the key pieces that we're presenting inside of Pro is our ability to actually automate more and more of the production process. Now, before I turn it over to Nick, I do want to just kind of touch on the workflow very briefly here. So you can see the workflow, beginning with data updates. We have to consume or ingest some data. There might be some change detection. What's changed within our database? What are the charts that are impacted by that? And then we get to the update cartography. We could really expand the update cartography out through a number of tools. Creation of the cartographic features, doing some of the data mining so we can more or less flatten that data model and optimize it for cartography. Updating the surround elements, kind of next step, and then ultimately exporting this out to some specific print formats, whether it's PostScript, PDF, GeoTIFF, things like that. So this workflow, this is what we used inside of ArcMap largely, and it's the same workflow that we're using inside of ArcGIS Pro. Like I said, the key difference is our ability to automate a lot of these steps within the workflow. Not only specific tools, that we find within update cartography, for example, but how do we put all of these processes together so we can have a fully automated production line? And so with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Nick Jones, who's actually going to walk us through some of the chart production elements, kind of going through the creation of a chart, beginning with the creation of an area of interest. That's part of the chart management, then going through and creating some of the cartographic features. How do we symbolize those and generate annotation off of those? So with that, Nick, I will turn it over to you.
Hey, thanks, Jonathan. Hi, my name is Nick. I'm one of the product engineers on the aviation products team here at Esri. Before we get started with the charting demo, let's go ahead and talk briefly about ArcGIS Pro. So with ArcGIS Pro, we now have the ribbon, which simplifies the user experience. You also have access to our library of base maps. And these are great, ready-to-use backgrounds for your products. It's also easy to connect to ArcGIS Online or your organization's specific enterprise portal, kind of like Jonathan was talking about, and search through any maps, data, and tools that are shared over enterprise networks, as well as publish your own back to them. I'd also like to mention that editing is made really simple in ArcGIS Pro, with lots of easy-to-use editing tools available from the ribbon, and the right side pane here. With each tool, there's expanded options. And also there's no more starting and stopping editing sessions. You're just always in edit mode with Pro, and we'll get into that a little later when we start actually generating some AOI features. Now, along with that, when it comes to sharing, Pro makes it really easy. Again, we have the ribbon up here, and you can export data, products, custom tools to your enterprise or web environments. With Pro, also updating is a lot easier. There's no uninstall required. You can simply install the newest versions over your previous installation. If your computer crashes for whatever reason, Pro has periodically been saving your progress, so the next time you launch, you can restore from that previous session. Now let's talk a little bit about what you get with ArcGIS for Aviation Extension. With the Aviation Extension for ArcGIS Pro, you get access to our tools for airports and charting. Most of these tools are Python-based geoprocessing tools. Because of this, it will make it easier for you to automate your workflow in the future. Say you want to import your AIXM 5.1 data message after generating an aviation geodatabase. With our extension, you have the ability to generate that aviation geodatabase with our provided schema and then import your data with our tools. With our extension, you also have access to sample ICAO style. We can just go ahead and open that real quick. This style is easily modified and extendable by the user and contains a bunch of symbology that's ready to use for points, lines, and polygons that might be common for aviation charts. We've also provided some sample chart templates and ICAO-style business rules and logic that will simplify the initial chart configuration for your organization. With the Aviation Extension for ArcGIS Pro, you also have access to our Aviation Charting ribbon. Now, Pro is context sensitive, and we'll see this play out a couple of ways during this demo. So it's going to expose our ribbon once you add a feature from an aviation geodatabase. So we can go ahead and expand our database here and add one of our features, and you'll see our charting ribbon come to life. Likewise, other tools useful for aviation charting workflows will populate throughout other panes and ribbons within the Pro interface as data is added. From this ribbon, you can see we have tools that aid with cartographic feature generation. We can easily create extraction queries that will filter out features we may not want for a given chart type. For example, say we only want to show features relevant to low or high charts. You also have the ability to manually include or exclude features for cartographic generation to support certain chart types. The output of these tools is stored in a couple of standalone tables in the Aviation geodatabase. When we run our geoprocessing tool to generate cartographic features, you will see these tables come into play. Now back to the charting ribbon. On the left side, we have our Aviation AOI related tools, and we'll show how this comes into play in this next part of the demonstration. Now we've discussed Pro and Aviation charting extension at a high level. So let's go ahead and dive in and generate our own new AOI and initialize a chart based on the AOI's attributes. The features currently being shown in this map are the main aviation features coming from our geodatabase. Let's say we need to generate a chart around the San Diego area. To initialize this chart, we need to create an AOI. So let's go ahead and turn off these main features and draw an extent for our new area of interest feature and save it. And this is a good opportunity to showcase how easy it is to edit in Pro. We simply go up to the editing ribbon, create, select the feature we want to create a new feature within, and start drawing our new AOI. And then we can save that new feature. And we have our new AOI generated. Now the AOI features in our data model contain attributes like map ID, spatial reference information, and tags that help our tool decide how they will behave while processing or data mining information in support of your charts. And you'll see this in a moment. We'll go back to the charting tab and kind of look at the AOI information. Also available from the AOI information tab is our Aviation AOI properties. And this is where you can cycle through your different charts in the tree and select which one you're working on. So you can see we have various map IDs for different types of aviation charts. And we've selected this San Diego AOI that we've made, and that's now the chart that we're working on. So we have our new AOI and a map project. Now we can go ahead and generate some cartographic features. We'll just go ahead and run this tool. And you can see those tables we spoke about earlier are part of the parameters for the tool. So we'll go ahead and run the tool. This geoprocessing tool is taking into account our AOI information, as well as any information in the Carto exceptions and extraction queries tables. The tool listens to those tables as it generates a new set of features from our main features. We call these cartographic features. These cartographic features are separated by the map ID coming from the AOI feature that we just generated. So we can go ahead and turn on the features we just generated. And you can see we now have cartos. The reason we make cartos is so that we can cartographically alter the attributes and even the geometry of a chart's visible features to meet different aviation charting specifications, while never altering anything about the original main data sets. You'll notice if I have the main features on, with my cartographic features, a few features have been filtered out by our extraction queries. Again, these could be for separating out things like high or low charts. At the charting level, cartographic features are created out by the map ID, as I mentioned before. And this comes off of that AOI feature that we generated. This is how we can have any number of charts represented with different symbols and labels, all coming from the same unaltered main data. I'm just going to run the Prepare Aviation Data tool. Now we have charts specific cartographic features, but how do we go about applying the business logic for aviation style labeling and symbology? The Aviation database is a complex and highly normalized data model optimized for data management, which enables charting with things like cartographic features and feature-linked annotation. The Prepare Aviation Data tool conducts data mining operations on your features, reaching throughout the database for related information that will support chart-specific business logic for labeling and symbology. To put it simply, this tool goes back into the database, loads needed information for your labels and symbols on your cartographic feature as an additional attribute. Once our tool is completed, we'll show these same cartographic features with the business logic we processed applied to them. And then you'll be able to see that symbology and labeling applied. Now, while we wait for that, we can briefly step through a couple of sample charts, and we can see how they each have their own set of cartographic features. Well, actually, the tool finished, so let's go ahead and look at that now. So we'll turn on our configured cartographic features that are now making use of that attribute that this tool just populated. And you can see that symbology and labeling has been applied. Now we can go ahead and step through a couple of the other charts, and we can see how they each have their own set of cartographic features, and each chart has its own set of business logic applied supporting different types of labels and symbols. So here's maybe another style of en route chart. Here's a chart that's a little more on the visual side, and maybe a surveillance style chart. Now, looking at these labels that we have right now on our newly initialized chart, these labels are coming straight off of the cartographic features. The logic handling label placement and aesthetics are possible thanks to our core labeling engine. Pro makes things pretty easy. As I mentioned before, lots of context-sensitive tools, easily accessible from the ribbon. If we select one of our configured carto features, you can see some more options came up here in the ribbon. We'll click labeling. And you can see all the specific changes we could make directly from this ribbon that would affect this dynamic labeling that we have. Now, this brings us to the next part of kind of the aviation charting workflow. Dynamic labeling is great and has its place in various applications of GIS. But what about labeling specifically for charting, where specifications need to be adhered to and placement is more permanent? With the Aviation Charting extension, you also get our Create Aviation Feature Linked Annotation tool. In the case of aviation charts, labeling and labeling requirements can be very complex. Generating aviation feature-linked annotation helps simplify the workflow by allowing us to have chart-specific instances of annotation stored as actual features on the map. Much like actual points on the map, or much like our cartographic feature, placement can easily be edited by the user. And these are all, again, separated by map ID. So we can go back to our Edit tab, and notice we have easy-to-use editing tools, one specifically for annotation, and we can start selecting, moving around, and doing some cartographic cleanup within the map space. In this chart, we've converted labeling to annotation. Our labeling engine has done a good job of estimating the cartographic placement of features, but the reason that we're doing cleanup is because, as we know with aviation charts, sometimes there's a lot of manual work involved to get it just perfect for print or distribution. And again, much like cartographic features, feature-linked annotation allows you to have many instances of different annotations for different charts while referencing the same main pieces of data. Each set of annotations is separated out by map ID, and all of this is drawn from the Aviation AOI feature that we generated earlier. In this Pro project, we have some sample layouts to simulate chart projects. One thing that is important to point out with Pro, though maps are seen inside the layouts, the extent is not linked. Users can feel free to conduct cartographic cleanup tasks, pan and zoom around in the map. So this would be the associated map. I can move this around, and it's not going to alter the extent or zoom level of the layout. And we can activate another layout here, kind of a ICAO sample en route style. Finally, we might all be curious about how we can share or export our charts and associated aviation data. From the Share tab in ArcGIS Pro, you can see it's very straightforward to publish data and maps to a web portal, or even export this entire project and send it to Jonathan as a package. As far as exporting charts, it's as easy as picking a format and setting a few parameters. Once we click Layout, we can select something like PDF and get our parameters right and export it. In just a few minutes, Jonathan will provide some excellent examples of how users are leveraging ArcGIS portals and the Aviation extension for ArcGIS Pro. And that's all I have for the technical demo for this portion. Amit will be up next to talk about the roadmap.
Thanks, Nick. I'm pulling up the roadmap for aviation charting now. I thought, what you showed, I thought there were little, some good nuggets to kind of take away. I think the last piece that you were talking about, the sharing, I think one of the things talked about is sharing projects. But when we get into some of the next couple of slides, we'll talk about actually sharing web services so that, from that same layout, you can actually create a series or a set of web services, feature services, map services that you can publish to your portal, publish to ArcGIS Online, things like that. The other thing that I thought was great was the ability to have multiple layouts within that same project file. So, if you wanted to switch between a low-level chart and a high-level chart, you could do that within the same application as opposed to opening up a new ArcMap document as an example, and then finding what you need to that. So I thought that was really great to be able to interact with multiple maps, multiple layouts within the same project file. So I think with that, Amit, I'm going to turn it over to you. I've got the roadmap for charting shown up on the screen. If you want to just address this really briefly.
Okay. Thanks, Jonathan. So as we're migrating to Pro, our focus is on simplicity, performance, and automation. And with each release, we're adding new capabilities, and we're prioritizing tools and functions that are shared across multiple products. So we're prioritizing tools that are used to create multiple products. So at our initial release at 2.5, we added tools to import AIXM data and denormalize the data for charting purpose. In the latest 2.6 release, we have added tools to manage chart-specific features and tools to label and symbolize those features. So as Nick demonstrated today, with all these capabilities at 2.6 release, we are now able to create simple IKO-style end-route and visual charts. In near term, we'll be adding more capabilities that will allow users to create more complex charts where they're displaying derived features. And for that high volume chart production, we are adding capabilities to tell users as they import their data what features got changed and which maps are affected with that change. And in midterm and long term, we are looking to add capabilities for cartographic editing, exporting your AIXM data, and all the surround elements that are needed for our various products like terminal charts. Okay.
Great, thanks, Amit. Yeah, thank you. I guess as I look at the roadmap, a lot of what I'm seeing are specific tools to help in the production process. I guess what I'm taking away from this is, we can actually start beginning chart production in ArcGIS Pro now for VFR charts, even for some of the en route charts as well. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, like all the tools that we're now looking at are there to help automate or help reduce that manual work you would have to do. Like all those data-driven tools that we're talking about are just to help you do things for you instead of you trying to find out the different pieces of data and make those changes. So yeah, you can start the tools now, and the tools that we'll be introducing will help you automate or expedite the process that you may need to do to produce your charts.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. I think that brings us up to a poll question. I mean, kind of taking a lot of what we just saw and what you've outlined for the roadmap. Kelly, do you want to present the poll question? I guess I'm not seeing the poll question come up. Nick or Kiyoshi, can you help out with the poll question if you can see it?
Yeah, I see it there, Jonathan. It's in the polls module, I guess, of the GoToMeeting dashboard. You may have to expand that section.
Okay. Well, if I remember correctly, I mean, what we're talking about or what we're trying to ask here is we can deliver a certain set of capabilities out of the box, basically having a pre-configured template for IKO chart production. So really what the question is asking is, if we were to, I guess, as part of that release, how likely would users be in just taking that and then publishing their chart straight from that template versus doing some kind of adaptation and configuring to their specific chart requirements. And really, when I say specific, I'm talking about in country, because we have, we've got the specimen charts that ICAO has. If we were to model something exactly like that, would there still be a need by organizations to further adapt that, or is there a desire to continue to adapt that? Because that can help inform in terms of our roadmap, how much do we need to put in terms of configurability, adapting versus, let's just get the capabilities out for users to integrate into their workflows. And do we have the results? Kiyoshi, I'm still not seeing anything, so I'm going to need your help here.
Yeah, I think the results should be up now. I'm seeing them on my screen. I think Kelly just shared them. Looks like let's see. So yeah, the results are kind of pretty well balanced. The kind of biggest group here, 51% said likely, so they'll be likely to use that. 27% said very likely, and then the rest said, yeah, smaller percentages, not likely, not at all. So
okay.
Does feel like a majority would take some value from those. So that's
okay. That's good. Good to know. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and move on here. I've got just a few more slides to kind of wrap things up, but Nick had talked a lot about kind of the sharing piece of it, or maybe it was kind of joint between Nick and myself in terms of an integrated platform. We've mentioned this a few times about having this integrated platform with the rest of ArcGIS. So even taking your existing AIM environment, for example, we can add ArcGIS Enterprise to it to create a fully connected WebGIS system. That environment gives us the capability to easily publish our content as web services and create some rich web mapping applications such as we see here. This is what LVNL in the Netherlands has produced. In fact, they released this earlier in the summer as a VFR chart viewer for the Netherlands. So it's a fantastic way of getting some of that aeronautical information published out using some of the same kind of ICAO styles and symbology as well. And there's other organizations that are doing this as well. So JCAB, the authority in Japan, doing something like this with their obstacle data. They also have an en route viewer as well. And then AIR in Spain also doing something, as far as their en route as well as their VFR data. So I think what it's doing, having applications like this, being able to publish these services is really helping organizations kind of reimagine their workflows and how they deliver some of the most up-to-date content to its users. So they're no longer tied to the kind of the paper chart and consequently no longer tied to that traditional 28-day AIRAC cycle. So this transformation is really creating new opportunities for organizations to think creatively how they can actually deliver some of this content to its users. So with this, I've got a live demo, just going to show you one of these applications here. So we're going to look at the application by AIR in Spain. So if you were to just go to AIR's AIP, what you would find is if you drill down into the en route section, I think under en route charts, get the chart index. They actually have a statement saying, look, our charts are no longer published within the AIP. Instead, we're delivering these as electronic charts, as electronic data for our users. So you can actually go to this website, and then they give you instructions of how you might be able to interact with this application. So I'll come over to the application here. You've got all of the aeronautical data. We can pull up the layer list. You can start to turn layers on and off as necessary. They've got really a NOTAM viewer as well, and it's telling me I should actually refresh it. It's been more than an hour since it's been sitting idle here. But I'll just go ahead and update the data, which is basically pulling in, I believe it's pulling in all of the NOTAM information. Here we go. So everything in yellow are the NOTAMs. We can actually identify and query some of the NOTAMs here. In this case, the vertical limit's been modified. Something else that we can do along with not only displaying NOTAMs, but actually kind of interacting with the data in terms of choosing different flight levels. So maybe I want to go to flight level 440 or 40,000 feet. go ahead and hit return here. And what it'll do, it'll show us all the airspace and data that's applicable for that particular volume of airspace from the lower limit all the way up to the upper limit. And so I can just kind of slide this around and query the data for different types of information based on flight level, and we're going to get different feedback on that. And then there's some printing, some measurement tools. These are kind of basic standard web mapping application tools that users can actually interact with. Again, LVNL has done something very similar as we see here, as other organizations have as well. Okay, so as we wrap up, you know, a lot of what you saw today was really presenting a new framework for aeronautical charting. So shifting and pivoting from ArcMap into ArcGIS Pro, taking advantage of what ArcGIS Pro is offering from kind of a core desktop application and how we can extend that to aviation charting. We've talked about it numerous times. It's integrated with the ArcGIS platform. That integration is really creating new business opportunities for organizations and helping them reimagine how they want to actually deliver that content. And then the last piece here is we can actually start with ArcGIS Pro now. So for those organizations that are doing aeronautical charting using ArcMap, now's a good time to start thinking about how do we integrate ArcGIS Pro into that workflow. For those that are new to doing GIS data-driven charting, ArcGIS Pro is a good first step into that, being able to leverage a lot of those automation tools to build out these chart production capabilities. So as a last slide, I just want to go over some webinars and events that are upcoming and even past. So actually next week we have the Esri European Airports GIS Exchange. This is a 2-day event that's going to run a few hours on each day. It's geared towards the European region, but it is open to everyone. So I would highly encourage, especially those airport attendees on the webinar today, to register for this. I think Kiyoshi is going to drop that link into the chat window for everybody to have access to. And then we also have another webinar that's coming up next month, deployable apps for aviation authorities and airports. I'm really excited about this one. This is where we can actually take a lot of that aeronautical information and build out different types of applications. And again, it's how are we delivering some of this content to our user community. So we'll go through, you know, creation of dashboards, perhaps on the hub site, working with field applications, our mobile applications, things like that. And then if you missed our Enhancing Collaboration for Obstacle Assessment webinar, that is recorded. You still have access to that. So I think Kiyoshi will basically drop the links in for both the upcoming webinar as well as the previous webinar.
Yeah, so Jonathan, I'm actually having trouble pasting those links into the chat. So I will definitely make sure we try to get those out to everybody, but for some reason I'm not able to paste the link directly in the chat right now.
Okay. Okay, so with that, what we can do is we can open it up for some questions.
Sure, I can definitely do that. We've got quite a good list here. I'll kind of just go through them in the order that they came in, and again, whatever we don't get to, we'll be trying to provide written answers as well for everybody. So there's a few questions here. See one. Let's see from Abel Perez. Work with American Airlines, and just wondering if, I guess, were any of the airlines asked to participate in designing the extension? So I guess what sort of input do we have with various customers?
Yeah, and it's I would say it's not limited to airlines. It's kind of opened up kind of across industry. So we do take input from various customers. I know that one of our customers, specifically an airline, Pegasus, in the past has provided input, and this was in the certainly within the ArcMap environment, but we've carried over some of these requirements into our ArcGIS Pro. We do take feedback. What I'll do is I'll put our emails in the last slide here up, and if you have feedback for us, we're more than happy to take that feedback and integrate that within the product, because we absolutely rely on our customers to help guide the direction of our product. What are we doing well, what are we not doing well, and help get some of those enhancements in. We've had a testament to Amit and his team. A couple of years ago, there was some requirements in terms of building out the communication, navigation, surveillance surfaces, and it was the fastest turnaround I've seen in terms of, it was brought forward by one of the civil aviation authorities in Latin America, and we were able to turn that around in I think like 6 to 8 months to get that into a released product. So, like I said, we absolutely do take input from our user community. So, I would encourage you, if you have comments, if you have thoughts and directions in terms of where we need to be taking the software, do let us know. And like I said, I'll put up our emails in the last slide.
Great, thank you. One, I think, quick one is just about getting the presentation slides. Is it possible to, will we be sharing these slides in any format? The specific question was asking about a PDF, but
yeah. So what we will do is, so the session is being recorded. We're going to make the recordings available to everybody that's registered with the link, so you can actually view the recording. So because we are going to have this as a recorded session, and you'll be able to access that on demand, there's no need to really create the PDFs from the slides. So I don't anticipate us having the PDF slides on hand, but you will have access to the recordings for sure.
Great. Next one, I think I can actually take a stab at the question about are the PDF exports, something when Nick demonstrated exporting the chart to PDF, are those exports raster or vector PDFs? From my experience, essentially it's sort of both. Primarily the vector data that is in our layouts is exported as vectors in the PDFs, but if we do have raster information in those products, like for example a hill shade or something like that, those layers will be rasterized as well during that export. I don't know if there's anything to add on that, Amit or Jonathan.
Nothing from my side.
Okay. Let's see. Great. This one might be more for Amit and Nick. During the demonstration of the en route chart, the labeling the distances was obscured by the route. So this is a little different than how they appear on the ICAO charts. Can the route be terminated automatically when reaching reaching the distance box or waypoint or TMA? So Nick and Amit, maybe this is something you can talk about. We didn't really get into masking at all.
Yeah.
So something maybe we can address.
Yes, I think for some of those use cases, we utilize masking, and that's one of the tools that is already available through Pro. And in upcoming releases, if we saw in my near-term vision, we have tools which can automate that workflow to generate masks for features that are going to be obstructing your annotation or your routes. So we will be adding those things near-term, but at the current release, you can do it using the tools already available in Pro.
Great. Thanks, Amit. Next question, and I guess this is another one for you, Amit. Is it possible to define a little more, I guess, firmly the terms near term, midterm, and long term in terms of our roadmap? Maybe just sort of ballpark in terms of months versus years, things like that.
Sure. So I think ArcGIS Pro, like we usually have 2 releases each year, and those releases sometimes shift by a month or so. So as a team, we always have a roadmap plan on what we want to accomplish for any given releases. And what we do at each release is try to explore what are the different options to create a new chart. We look at our existing implementation and how our customers are utilizing it. So our plan is to have most of the things done in which is for a near term, we would say in 1 or 2 releases. But as we start implementing, we might find more additional use cases, or we might find things that might push us to the next release. That's why we have those things as near term and midterm and long term. So by near term, I think we are thinking about 1 to 2 releases. We should have most of the capabilities available. And so far, we have been doing really good. Like what we saw today was initially we were not even thinking to be done by 2021 or start of 2021, and we're really ahead of our schedule. But as we are looking at things, and this current releases, we are finding more questions, and so things change. So that's why we have like near term is 1 or 2 releases, and then midterm would be things after that, and so on.
Okay, great, thanks. See a couple other questions here. How are we doing on time, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think we're doing fine on time. Yeah.
Okay, I'll just keep kind of plowing through these then. Question about does the extension offer the so-called copper penny diagrams? This is shown on the Jepson chart as a symbol of the runway, but zoomed in out of scale to more easily see the runways. So yeah, this is one. Amit and I were kind of chatting about this behind the scenes here when this one came in. This is the copper penny diagrams. The term I'm not. This is a new term for me. I think if I understand the description here, we're talking about on sort of en route and visual style charts, seeing the runway pattern at the airports that if drawn to scale would probably be too small to see, but we rendering those as sort of a blown up pattern so you can recognize that airfield pattern, and that is something that the software will be able to support. Largely I think that's just part of the kind of configuration of your symbology and your business rules when designing that chart. One thing I think I'll say is that we work very closely with the FAA, for example, in terms of supporting their needs for both en route and visual charts. And so if this copper penny diagram is anything like that, the sort of depiction on a FAA visual chart, then that's definitely something that will be included in terms of a capability. Again, anything to add there?
No, I think you're right on in terms of what they're looking for. It's really about the runway layout,
right?
Being able to visualize that.
Great. Let's see. This is kind of a more general question. What are the requirements for a company to convert, basically to move to the extension for their workflow in terms of data formats, feeds, equipment, users? Is that something? I don't know if we can address all those things, but in terms of some of those big picture things.
I'll take a stab at it because it is. That can be quite a bit depending on the different types of data that you're working with. I think the first question to kind of bounce it back to you is, what are the charts you want to focus on? Do you need to produce all of the ICAO charts? Are you looking at just a handful of those, and which ones are those? But really, because it's the charts that determine what type of data is actually needed. And then we can get into data formats. Where's the data coming from? How is it being maintained? This is really a conversation, and it's not just a one-way answer that we can provide you, but it's something that we'd want to work with you on to kind of understand what the layout is with your specific organization. We've got a team that can help kind of guide you through that process in terms of, best practices. This is what we've seen very successful in the past with other customers based on certain data requirements and things like that. I think in terms of the equipment, running ArcGIS Pro, there's different ways that we could look at this. One is just from a standard desktop deployment, and then there's kind of in a connected environment, connected data environment where you're connected to an enterprise environment and you're doing more high volume chart production. So it depends on where you fall in that as well. But on the equipment side, really to run ArcGIS Pro, I've got a simple laptop here that probably not designed to run Pro, but I'm able to run Pro. There are some system requirements, and maybe if we can locate those system requirements, we can pop those into the chat window if we're able to have any success with using the chat feature here.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Let's see. Oh yeah. So I'm sorry. A couple feeds coming in here at once. Another question about controller charts for the U.S. So specifically, will we be providing controller charts for the U.S.? I might let Amit tackle this one a bit. I do know that. Well, I'll let you take a stab, Amit.
Actually, I don't know what control charts entail.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so I mean, I can take a stab. My understanding, and you know, we can submit another question if I'm not quite getting this right, but you know, the controller charts in the U.S., from my experience, are somewhat similar to an en route chart, but with some of their own kind of customized appearances and things specifically for those controllers. The short answer is that, you know, we won't necessarily be providing a specific template for those charts. I mean, it's something we you know, we may be able to do, but you know, the software definitely will be able to produce those charts. As I mentioned earlier, we work very closely with the FAA for, you know, in terms of their using the software for producing, you know, en route and visual charts. And so, you know, being an organization that's currently producing charts with the, you know, the ArcMap version of this extension, you know, we're going to make sure that that capability carries over into Pro as well. So, you know, being able to kind of take that same approach of modifying or you know, making those changes to create a controller chart, I think is definitely something that will be possible.
Yeah, and maybe just to add to that, I mean, as we're getting, I mean, this is feedback coming directly from users, so yeah. We look at this and we'll see, okay, you know, what are the deviations from existing templates that we have, and we might find that, look, with just a couple of changes, we can include this as a template as well. So I think we now have an action to look at this a little bit closer in terms of what we can actually provide for the users.
Yeah, it's a good point, Jonathan. You just based on that kind of poll results as well, right? The, you know, realizing that users will likely or very likely make use of those templates, then the more of those kind of templates that we can identify and include.
Yeah, and this product. I guess what may end up happening, you know, as we include the ICAO templates within the solution, we may find that they will users want to do some more configuring and adapting of, let's say, the en route charts, but they're okay with the ATC surveillance chart as it is, so they don't want to configure that. So there's probably somewhere in between that we're realistically looking at.
Great. So there's a couple of questions in here about costs and trials and things like that. I'll kind of let you take a general stab at that, Jonathan, but I will mention, I think we have a survey here that'll come up as we exit the webinar, and one of the questions on there is whether you'd like to be contacted. So I think that, you know, if you are interested in a trial or more information, then that's probably the most direct way to get that feedback. But anything else you'd like to add, Jonathan?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we've got offices all over the world, our local offices that we work with in country. And so what we'd want to do is create the connection with that distributor office as well, because honestly, they would be providing the software, the support. You know, we're gonna, on the back end, we would be supporting them as well and be engaged in any kind of conversation. So it really is a team in terms of how we would work with customers. But yeah, as Kiyoshi mentioned, we'll have a couple of survey questions after this. Please do take the time to answer those two relatively short survey questions, and that'll help us out.
Great. Let's see, one other question here. Is there functionality available to explore airspace alternatives, new nav aids, approach departure procedures, etc.? I think if I'm interpreting this correctly, we're looking at is there capabilities for, I guess, exploring or experimenting with changes that need to be made to airspaces. Again, maybe I'll kind of let Amit or Nick handle this after.
Yeah, I was thinking this is talking more about like creating those CNS surfaces around nav aids or approach and departure. And yeah, those capabilities are currently available to generate those surfaces, but I'm not sure about alternatives.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I was going to just mention is that, you know, in terms of visualizing airspace and you know, things like that, if you're designing a new airspace, the kind of core functionality of Pro is great for that. It's, you know, one of the things, I can't remember if it was mentioned in the talk at all, but another kind of thing about Pro is that it's both 2D and 3D sort of capabilities are native in the same application, right? So in the old days of ArcMap, you had ArcMap for your kind of plan view stuff and ArcScene or ArcGlobe for 3D visualization. Now it's all kind of native there in Pro. So, you know, whether it's designing a new airspace or just seeing what changes will do to, you know, how an airspace or for those sort of visualization exercises, that capability is there in Pro. Let's see.
Okay, I think we have time for a couple more questions, Kiyoshi. I actually saw a few questions about training, so if I could just kind of address that really quickly.
Yeah.
So we do have a COTS training module for aviation charting. Now that is, right now, it is in ArcMap. So it's not something I would recommend that users take at this point. Now that's not a blanket statement, because there are some users where ArcMap does make sense right now as we do this transition over to Pro. But to answer your question, we're in the process of developing the training material for Pro. When that will be ready, I don't know that I have a hard answer on that, but we will continue to engage with the community to let our users know. Suffice it to say that even if we had the training material right now, I think it would be a little bit challenging to deliver that training given the current pandemic. So our options would be really remote, and that, depending on time zones, as one of the users kind of stated here, that can be especially challenging, especially for our Asia Pacific audience. So we're looking at kind of all options in terms of how we actually deliver the training. But we do need to get all of our Pro content material into a customizer COTS package for training, and that's what we're working on now.
Great.
And maybe just one more question, if you can find one.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's a few in here. There's several in here that are kind of specifically talking about like terminal procedures stuff.
Okay.
And so maybe we can just take a kind of final minute here. Maybe I'll let Amit take a stab at it, but just in terms of our kind of where we're at with terminal procedures, in terms of the kind of capabilities and functionalities there. A lot of it sort of centers around the kind of appearance and style and, you know, customization of those charts. Sorry to put you on the spot, Amit.
Yes, I think the terminal procedures, like some of those MSAs, TAs, or profile views that you see on the terminal procedure charts, those are some of the things that we're planning for long term. And that's because of the reason of how surround elements are done in Pro. What you can do today is, like, you can draw those elements, because with layout, you also have a lot of graphic tools available to generate those things manually. But what we are looking forward is to do a data-driven system. So if you have your data imported from your AIXM or some other data feed that you have in our data model, we want to be able to generate those things pretty easily. And in the past, in ArcMap, we have given options to customize those things. And with Pro, like having a style is even much easier. So what we're planning to do is to have various amount of styles available, and each and every component that you can style for your MSA or TA or profile view be available to you, and it's much more data driven. So to design that kind of system, we want to spend a lot of effort and understand that we make sure that we get it right. And that's one of the biggest tasks that we know we have to do. So we're trying to do some of the tools that are needed for other users, which right now they can't do it manually. So we're trying to add those tools in current releases. And yeah, that's one of the things that we'll be adding it. And it's not, even though it's our long-term vision, but it's one of those tools that we'll be adding incrementally. So when we say long-term, by that we mean like by that time it would be completely capable.
Right.
So we might add it, introduce in like a couple of releases, but it would be available with limited capabilities, and we'll keep on adding things to make it where we think, okay, it's completely done now.
Right. And just to tie that back to something that kind of came up earlier, you know, that's definitely an area where we are, you know, we would be excited to work with, you know, with users or potential users to make sure that we're identifying all of the kind of use cases and needs that need to be supported. So, all right, I guess hand it back over to you, Jonathan.
Yeah, I think that's gonna wrap it up. I think we certainly appreciate everybody's time. There was a lot of good questions that came in. We will be doing the same webinar for the Asia Pacific region if you didn't get enough of it. That being said, the session was recorded, so we will be sending out a follow-up email with a link to the recording, so you'll be able to access it that way. So I do want to thank Nick, Amit, Kiyoshi for all of your help in putting this webinar together, and of course to all of our attendees. So thank you and have a good rest of the day.